let me just hit the record. Ripper, recording in progress. Let me share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to be short and sweet with this, and then I'm still going to stay here because I know that throughout we've done training principles for 3 lessons in class. 12 training principles. I covered off 3 in the first lesson, 3 in the second lesson, and I did 6 in yesterday's lesson. I know that we had sort of 1 or 2 people away in that middle session. I think 1 person away in the first session, and in yesterday we had about 5 or 6 people away. So I really need everyone to totally have a great understanding of all 12 training principles, and I am more than happy to discuss any of them with you today. So that's the number 1 priority, is that you feel comfortable with training principles by the end of this lesson. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I've put together for you. All of them are up on Compass, so obviously you can go over to resources, and I've chucked them into this chapter 12. There's 4 documents in there, and my job right now is to run you through what those 4 documents are and then what I think you should be doing in this lesson. I get it. It's a Friday, it's a cold, wet day, and everyone's lacking motivation. I have no expectation that you do PE work for 75 minutes. Please understand that. But it is important that we keep our mind ticking over and doing some stuff. And Mr. Smith and I are going to sort of chat on the phone later today. He's getting a pool installed at his house. So he's actually just sent a photo of the pool being delivered via crane at the moment. So he's a little busy, but we're going to have a phone conversation later about how we're going to do the training sessions online, because we really cannot afford to miss out on any of this. So it might even be that the circuit session or the plyometric session or something that we give you, you might have to go out into a backyard on Tuesday next week and complete that session yourself. And I'll be available if you want to do it over Zoom, that you can show me what you're doing. Otherwise, it's pretty self-explanatory and straightforward to do some star jumps and some, bench jumps or box jumps, etc. So we'll see how we go with that. I'll talk to him on the phone, or whether we do have a contingency plan to push that sack back a week. Okay, so these documents here. The first document, the training methods table, you'll notice that they're one of the 12 training principles is not listed on this. So there's only 11 listed. The one that's not listed is type, which is to choose the correct training method. Okay, that one's not listed because I don't know why Mr. Smith decided not to put it on his list. So you can either add it down the bottom here and just sort of press tab and put your type in and add it there, or you can leave it off because it is, make sure you hit the right type of training method, totally up to you. Basically, you need to get to a position where you can fill in this middle column yourself with no textbook. That means that you totally understand all 12 training principles, okay? What we've added here is, how do I actually apply that training principle when writing a training program? So, for example, when we talk about progressive overload, and we talked about it being between 2 and 10% increase and only changing one variable at a time, what I would want to see is that you're actually talking about a 2 to 10% increase, only changing one variable at a time. That's the sort of stuff you write in that column. Over here, we want examples of like 4 times 10 at 20 kilograms. What does that look like when you add 10% to it? So you're actually getting some practice, sorry, Bridget, at the maths, of actually working out what does 10% maximum look like. So if I actually go to 4 times 11 at 20 kilograms, actually working out, if I've gone from 40 repetitions to 44 repetitions, does that work mathematically? That sort of stuff is really important. Or do I need to go down to 3 sets of 12, and does that mathematically work out? Because the more we practice it, the easier it becomes. So filling in that right-hand column gives you a little bit more practice at applying these skills rather than just having the knowledge. So that's the first thing you can have a go at doing. Second thing, I've put a PowerPoint together. Well, I stole a PowerPoint. There's 4 slides I want to talk about because they go into a little bit more depth than what we did in the classroom. So the first one is slide 5. I actually just want to give you a minute to have a look at slide 5. Hopefully, if I zoom in, you get the same view as what's on my screen here. Go away, Compass. So hopefully you can see a big grid with a couple of gray and black sort of boxes and lines. Kappa, can you nod if that's what you can see? Brilliant. So this is Michael Phelps, absolute legend of his sport. And when you first look at this, I reckon about 2 weeks ago, you would have been really confused. I think now you should be able to start picking this apart. And in another week's time, I think this should make total sense to you. So I'll just take a couple of minutes. Michael Phelps, elite athlete. He's training through the months of September all the way through to August of the following year. It's 2000 to 2001. So we know that this training program is covering a 12-month span, okay? It's got timestamp dates in there. And if you just look between the 2nd of August and the 9th of August, these are weeks, okay? So you can just work out it's a 7-day period here. Within those weeks, he's got a calendar of when his swim meets are. So he timestamps in the World Cup and it's domestic for him. He doesn't have to travel. Then he's got his Christmas meet and it's an international one. The reason why these timestamps are really important is because when we talk about periodization, he needs to do his tapering so he can peak at each of these competitions. There's no point in him going to a World Cup or an Atlanta Championships or the All-Star swimming meet when he's training at his highest point and his body is already going through that catabolic effect. So he's not going to win the race. So each of these timestamps helps determine where he is going to go through cycles of his training and therefore do periodization. Then we actually look at what is his focus. And we spoke yesterday, and for those people who weren't there, you're going to have to catch up on this, about maintenance of certain fitness components while other fitness components are being improved. So you can see here that he is working on strength, endurance, and speed. And at the beginning of the training program, he is rehabilitating some sort of injury to do with his strength. It doesn't say what part of the body. And he's just maintaining his endurance and his speed abilities. When he gets into the next phase of his training, he's building. He is doing some progressive overload on his strength. He is just generally progressing his endurance, but not as a main focus. And he's still only maintaining speed. So for those people yesterday who were in class, you would understand that he would probably expect to be doing 2 sort of sprint sessions per week to get the maintenance in speed there. And as he goes across, you'll notice that different aspects of the fitness components dip into maintenance, while other aspects of the fitness components go into that progressive overload and trying to improve so that he can peak at the right time, okay? And then over here is having a look at what his training load looks like. So this is planning in advance what they think his progressive overload is going to get to. And if you look at this volume of 100%, that would be ideally what he is maximally capable of being able to lift, sprint, and endure in the swimming pool. They're actually starting his training at 20, 30, 40% of what they believe his maximum capabilities are. So it gives you room to grow. And if I go back to that previous document that I was looking at, where we're looking at this 4 times 10, 4 times 11, I've mentioned before in class, if the parameters tell you to do anywhere between 3 to 6 sets, 8 to 10 reps, you're silly if you start at 6 sets of 10 reps, because you've got nowhere to go. And that's what they're working on here with Phelps, is don't start at 100% because you've got nowhere to overload. And if you do, you're going to overtrain the athlete, which was another principle we discussed in class yesterday. Okay. So hopefully I'm getting a nod or two and people are saying, yep, that makes a bit more sense to me. And I think a week or so ago it wouldn't, which fills me with a bit of confidence. Next slide I wanted to look at was slide number 23. So I'll just head down here. Here we go. Okay, periodization. I spoke about this generally, and I said at a later stage, I want to talk through 3 words: micro, meso, and macro cycles. And I just want to do that quickly now because I showed you that Phelps diagram. It's making more sense. Let's confirm some understanding. So in a training program that lasts multiple months, we will see micro cycles. These are the shortest breakdowns within a training program. They usually last for 1 week. They could be 2 weeks, or it could be 4 days, but they're very short segments of a training program, okay? It consists of a small number of training sessions that form a recurrent unit. So what that means is I've got a focus for this week, and in this week, I'm progressive overloading that strength, but I'm going to maintain my speed and my endurance. That is a microcycle. It's a 1 week focus. And next week, I'm going to have a slightly different focus. Okay. You'll have multiple microcycles within a program. A mesocycle is multiple microcycles with a similar focus. So for AFL, for example, they have their preseason. Their preseason is a mesocycle, even though there'll be blocks of progressive overload in there, and there'll be times where they're working on their running and times where they're working on their speed and times where they're working on strength. The whole thing is overloading the athlete to make them better. Then they will have a competition phase. You don't really want to break down the athlete's body when they've got to compete every weekend. So that's all about maintenance and keeping them at that elite level and ready to perform well. So that becomes the next mesocycle. And then finally, you get that off-season phase, which is your transition phase, which is another mesocycle. So you can see here that we're talking about sort of 3 or 4 months worth becomes a mesocycle. And again, it has a purpose and a reason. Each microcycle within it will have different focus, but they all have a common goal. Finally, you have these macro cycles, and this is usually multiple mesocycles. So most commonly it's a year, okay? And it usually goes from competition to competition. So for AFL, for example, it goes from preseason all the way through to the next year's preseason. That would be one macro cycle. But I can see Kappa on my screen, and he's a big football buff. Some of the athletes in football prioritize World Cup higher than any other competition. Other athletes will prioritize their other leagues, but a World Cup macro cycle is 4 years. An Olympic athlete's macro cycle is 4 years. So an Olympic athlete's mesocycle might be 12 months or 6 months within that 12 months. So depending on the athlete's competition phase and when it lands on that scheduling will determine how big or small each of the cycles are, okay? So just having knowledge that the breakdown of each of those cycles has a specific name, okay? We start with obviously micro being the smallest, usually a week, meso being the next largest, which is groups of those weeks. So usually months, a couple of months, and then macro usually goes up to about a year, all right? 2 more slides that are going to make a bit more sense when I give you an activity to do in the next couple of minutes. Slide number 32, here it is. Beautiful. Now, I've mentioned warm up a fair bit in the classroom, but I'm going to ask you to start writing them in about 5 minutes' time. So don't forget that a warm up needs to be active. It needs to raise the muscle temperature and needs to begin the body going through the sort of the aerobic energy system as predominant. So building up a little bit of H2O on the inside and heat, so you might be able to sweat. You will be doing some stretching. It's used to prevent injury. Start with dynamic stretching and move into static if you have to. You might want to do a bit of skill development work in the warm up. Now, be very careful when you're writing training programs for VCEPE that you don't try and prescribe work on handball or torpedo skills or drop punt skills. You don't have to get that specific, but you do have to know that an athlete like a footballer will be doing a swinging leg action for kicking a ball and a swinging arm action for a handball, okay? So doing some sort of movements that replicate skills in that game is really critical to a warm-up. You're then going to do the main conditioning session within your training program, okay? So this is where if you're doing an aerobic continuous training session, you do your 20 minutes of non-stop running. If you're doing a resistance session, you do your 3 sets at 8 reps at 60% max, 1 rep max, etc. bench press. Then you go into your recovery or cool down. The best thing about recovery or cool down is to do similar movements to what you've just done at a lower intensity. We talked about that when we talked about EPOC and recovery already, okay? So cool down is a part of a training session. And we know the benefits of that to reduce stiffness and the delayed onset muscle soreness that comes on after training sessions. Finally, I want you to get familiar with looking at a template. Okay, apparently it's back on slide number 17. Let me grab that. Here we go. This is something that you're going to want to fall in love with, which is Mr. Smith and I's version of a training log or diary. Okay. This can be modified and manipulated any way you want. And if you do not like the layout of our training log or diary, you can create your own. We'll tell you that at the start of the SAC. I'm telling you that now, and I'll tell you nearly every lesson until we do the next couple of SACs. What we have tried to design is a guide that allows you to hit as many training principles as possible when designing a single training session. If you follow this guide and you are able to write in things like what you're doing on your warm-up, how long that warm-up is lasting, maybe there's a distance involved, maybe you just put a little dash in there because distance is not relevant for what you're doing because you're doing star jumps, for example. You might use sets and reps, or because you're running 1 kilometer, you don't need to tell me it's 1 set and 1 rep. It's just 1 run of 1 kilometer. Whatever works. You don't have to fill in every column within a row, but all the information is provided in there will help you hit the training principles, so the intensity, etc. Then you get into the actual mid bulk of the session, which is to work on the conditioning phase. So either sets or reps or distance or rate of perceived exertion or heart rate, etc. You are well within your rights to change any of these subheadings. If you want to change it to distance, rest, intensity, go for it, because that works for your training session. But just having it laid out in this form makes it very easy to write a training session. And you may even need to change the headings on these columns for today's activity, okay? But I wanted to show you what it looks like before I ask you to actually do one. All right, that is in Compass, and you might want to look at it. And now there's 2 activities for you to do. So right now I'm speaking to the students who have done all training principles. If you have missed a session with me in the classroom and do not have notes on all 12 training principles, that's your number 1 job. If you're a student who's been in every class so far, you can open up these 2 documents. Firstly, there's this document. I created a man named John. John plays a sport that we have no idea what it is, but John has done some fitness testing, and John's fitness testing has proven that he needs to improve his speed as a fitness component, and he needs to maintain both flexibility and muscular power. John's individuality, he needs Sundays off. That's already booked in as a total rest day for him. And John also plays a team sport. So on Monday morning, Wednesday afternoon, and Friday morning, John trains with his club for team training. But you are John's individual personal trainer who has been hired to work on his speed and to maintain his flexibility and power. Now, I want you to include which training methods you've chosen, slot them into this program, and how long each session is going to last, okay? And you need to make sure you also don't overtrain him, but you have to hit things like frequency with the training principles on this table here. Okay, so that's one activity that's on Compass that I think could be enjoyable as well for you to try and piece that jigsaw puzzle together. And trust me, your first thoughts will probably be wrong. And the reason we do it online is that you can then, drag and drop a session into another space to ensure that you've given adequate rest before the next session. Don't forget, if for some reason you're doing a lower body activity one day, you are able to back it up with an upper body activity that same afternoon or the next day, and that's still considered rest for lower body. I have not told you whether he needs to work on his lower body or upper body, but you don't need to create any bench press or squats or anything like that. You're just picking the right training method. Page 305 on your textbook is brilliant for helping you pick the right training method. Final little activity is what you've already seen, which is one of these training logs, and it's just having a go at starting to fill one in. And we've actually given you some guidelines down below, which is about adding some stretching and a continuous training session within this training program diary. So you're going to think about what sort of stretches you're going to do, and whether you're going to do them in the warm up or the cool down when the body is warm, that's totally up to you. Whether you're going to do dynamic or static stretches, and whether you're going to do PNF or ballistic stretches for this athlete. And then you're going to start working out what sort of running you are going to do, whether it's going to be fartlek-based running or 20 minutes of continuous non-stop running. What intensity are you going to run at? Just have a go at starting to fill in one of these diaries. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Recap, very simple. Jared, that photo is amazing. Number one, make sure you got notes on all 12 training principles in your book. If you do not, that's your first priority. Number two, you can start filling in John's weekly diary that I gave you and start slotting in some training sessions and use page 305 of the textbook. Dot point number three, start filling in a training log that improves flexibility and continuous training session within there, and see how you can manipulate the columns and get used to taking control of that document for me. Okay. If you have any questions or need anything, I'll stick around for the next 15, 20 minutes in here. Otherwise, enjoy, good luck, have an awesome weekend, stay safe, and yeah, I'll see you in class on Tuesday in Zoom again.
Beauty. Cheers, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Cheers, sir.
No problem at all.